The concrete cracked like thunder as Marcus drove the jackhammer deeper into his own pool deck. 20 years of marriage, 15 years in this house, and now Karen Martinez was screaming that his backyard belonged to the HOA. But when she pulled out that surveyor's report, when she smiled that cold, victorious smile, Marcus realized this wasn't about property lines at all. This was about the secret she thought was buried forever. And as the jackhammer hit something that definitely wasn't concrete, Karen's face went white. Because some secrets don't stay buried, they rise to the surface, demanding justice. The jackhammer bucked in Marcus Webb's hands like a living thing, sending vibrations through his bones as chunks of concrete exploded across the backyard. Sweat poured down his face despite the October chill, each strike releasing months of pent-up frustration. The pool had been cracked beyond repair since the earthquake, a constant reminder of everything that had fallen apart in his life. Just a little more, he muttered, adjusting his grip. The renovation would cost him his savings, but it was better than staring at that jagged fissure every morning with his coffee. The machine roared again, drowning out the suburban quiet of Maple Ridge Estates. Marcus had checked the city permits twice, called the utility companies, done everything by the book. After 30 years as a civil engineer, he knew the drill. That's when he heard it, a voice cutting through the mechanical thunder like a blade. Stop! Stop right now! Marcus released the trigger, and the sudden silence felt deafening. He turned to see Karen Martinez storming across his backyard, her heels clicking against the flagstone path he'd laid himself 5 years ago. The HOA president wore her authority like armor, press blazer, clipboard clutched to her chest, lips pursed in that expression he'd come to dread. What the hell do you think you're doing? Karen's voice carried that particular pitch that made neighbors peer through their curtains. Marcus pulled off his safety goggles, wiping concrete dust from his face. Fixing my pool, Karen. Same thing I told you at the meeting last month. Your pool. She let out a sharp laugh. That's where you're wrong, Marcus. Dead wrong. 3 other figures emerged from behind her. Bill Peterson from 2 houses down, wielding a digital camera, Sandra Kim, the HOA secretary with her ever-present notepad, and someone Marcus didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. This is harassment, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Something in Karen's demeanor was different today. Predatory. Harassment. Karen's eyes glittered. I'd call it property protection. You see, we've had some concerns about the property lines in this section of the development. Specifically, your property lines. The man with the briefcase stepped forward. Mr. Webb. I'm Jonathan Hayes, licensed surveyor. Mrs. Martinez commissioned a comprehensive survey of this area. Marcus felt the first stirring of unease. I have my own survey. From when I bought the house. 15 years ago, Karen said smoothly. Before the Martinez family moved in next door. Before certain improvements were made that might affect boundary determinations. Hayes opened his briefcase with surgical precision, withdrawing a rolled document. I'm afraid there's been a significant error in your property assessment, Mr. Webb. According to my measurements, your pool area extends 18 inches beyond your actual property line. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's impossible. 18 inches into HOA common area, Karen continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Which means this entire pool renovation you're doing, it's being performed on community property, without authorization. Marcus stared at the survey as Hayes unrolled it. The precise lines and measurements swam before his eyes. His pool, his deck, the space where he'd barbecued for his daughter's graduation party, where he'd taught her to swim, all of it highlighted in red. This is bullshit, he said, his engineer's mind racing through the implications. My original survey was conducted by Precision Land Services, Hayes interrupted. They lost their license 3 years ago. Multiple boundary disputes, several lawsuits. Their work is considered unreliable. Sandra Kim scribbled furiously in her notepad while Bill Peterson's camera clicked away, documenting every angle of the pool area. Even if this is accurate, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice level, 18 inches is margin of error territory. Any reasonable person, reasonable. Karen stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and suffocating. You know what's not reasonable, Marcus? Destroying community property without permits. That's what we call willful damage. The surveyor cleared his throat. There's also the matter of the retaining wall. It appears to extend nearly 3 feet into the common area. Marcus looked at the low stone wall he'd built along the pool's edge. One that had taken him 3 weekends and cost him a herniated disc. That wall prevents erosion. It protects everyone's property. It's an unauthorized structure on HOA land, Karen said. Her smile was razor thin, which means it needs to come down. All of it. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Karen nodded to Bill Peterson, who moved closer with his camera. As of this moment, you're ordered to cease all work on this project. Any further excavation, any damage to HOA property, and will be forced to take legal action. Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, Karen's cold satisfaction, Hayes' professional indifference, Sandra's nervous excitement, Bill's obvious enjoyment of the drama. The neighborhood he'd called home for 15 years suddenly felt foreign. I've put $20,000 into this renovation, he said. Quietly. That's unfortunate, Karen replied. Perhaps you should have been more careful about where you were spending it. The jackhammer sat silent beside the half-demolished pool deck, chunks of concrete scattered like the remains of his plans. Marcus had never hit anyone in his life, but his hands were shaking with the urge to grab Karen Martinez by her perfectly styled hair and shake her until she stopped talking. Instead, he forced himself to breathe. I want to see the original property records. Every survey, every deed, every document you're basing this on. Of course. Karen's smile widened. Sandra will provide you with copies. For a reasonable administrative fee. How reasonable? $500. Per document. The number hung in the air like a slap. Marcus calculated quickly. Original survey, deed, HOA covenant documents, environmental impact studies. Karen was looking at charging him thousands just to see the paperwork that supposedly proved she was right. This is extortion. This is proper procedure, Karen corrected, which you would know if you attended HOA meetings more regularly. Marcus had attended exactly 2 meetings in 15 years. Both times, he'd left after 20 minutes of listening to debates about mailbox colors and acceptable window treatments. Fine, he said. I'll pay your fees. I'll review every document. And if you're wrong, if even one measurement is off, I'm filing complaints with the county, the state licensing board, and anyone else who'll listen. Karen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty? Or calculation? You do that, Marcus. You fight this all the way if you want to. She turned to leave, then paused. But while you're fighting, remember that the HOA has a responsibility to protect all residents from undesirable elements. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Marcus felt it in the way Bill Peterson's camera lingered on his face, the way Sandra Kim's pen scratched extra notes in her pad. What's that supposed to mean? Karen looked back at him with something that might have been pity. It means that sometimes when you dig too deep, Marcus, you find things that were better left buried. The group walked away, their footsteps echoing, across the flagstone until they disappeared around the side of his house. Marcus stood alone in his backyard, surrounded by the debris of his interrupted project, the jackhammer silent beside him like a sleeping predator. He knelt and picked up a chunk of concrete, studying the clean break where the machine had sheared through. The interior was solid, well-cured, exactly the kind of work he'd expected from the original contractor. Nothing suggested any structural issues that would explain the cracks. As he turned the piece in his hands, something caught his eye. A thin line of discoloration running through the concrete, darker than the rest. He'd seen similar marks before, in foundations where rebar had corroded or where foreign materials had been incorporated during the pour. Marcus set the chunk aside and walked to the edge of the excavation. The jackhammer had broken through about 4 feet of the pool deck, revealing the sub-base underneath. Most of it looked normal, gravel, sand, the usual foundation materials. But in one corner, where the machine had bitten deepest, something didn't belong. A piece of fabric. Faded blue, maybe denim, poking up through the disturbed earth-like. An accusatory finger. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, his engineer's mind cataloguing the possibilities. Construction debris was common in older developments. Workers often buried scraps rather than hauling them away. Could be anything. A top, old work clothes, packaging material. But the fabric looked too intact, too deliberately placed. And there was something else, something that made his stomach clench with sudden dread. The surveyor's measurements had been precise, profess. Marcus sat in his kitchen at 2:17 a.m., staring at the piece of fabric spread across his dining table like evidence at a crime scene. The athletic department tag glowed under the overhead light, mocking him with its innocence. Outside, Maple Ridge. Estate slept peacefully, unaware that a 15-year-old murder had just clawed its way to the surface. He'd covered the excavation with a top after dark, but his hands still shook from what else he'd found. More fabric, part of a shoe, and something that made his stomach turn, a class ring with initials that matched the missing boy's name. Tommy Martinez, star quarterback, honor student, dead at 17 and buried like garbage under what would become Marcus's pool deck. The question that had kept him awake wasn't who had killed the boy. It was why Karen Martinez, Tommy's own aunt, had orchestrated his discovery. Marcus's laptop hummed on the table beside the evidence, its screen filled with newspaper archives from 2009. The headlines told a story of community grief and police frustration. Local teen missing after homecoming dance search continues for. Maple Ridge star athlete family offers $50,000 reward for information police investigation stalls in Martina's case, but it was the final article, dated 8 months after Tommy's disappearance. That made Marcus's blood run cold. Martina's family leaves Maple Ridge following nephew's memorial service. The accompanying photo showed Karen Martinez, 15 years younger but wearing the same cold expression, standing beside a for sale sign, in front of the house that would eventually become Marcus's home. She'd left town, abandoned the search, given up on her nephew. Or so everyone thought. Marcus scrolled through property records, his engineer's mind working through the timeline. The Martinez family had owned the lot where his house now stood. Construction had been halted for 6 months after Tommy's disappearance, officially, due to permit issues, but Marcus suspected the real reason was the police investigation of the entire development. When construction resumed, the Martinez family was gone. But somehow, 5 years later, Karen had returned. Not to the old house, but to the new development next door. Close enough to watch. Close enough to wait. Close enough to make sure the secret stayed buried. Until now. Marcus closed the laptop and walked to his window. Karen's house was dark except for a single upstairs light. He wondered if she was sleeping peacefully or lying awake, calculating her next move. The sound of a car engine broke the suburban silence. Marcus watched a black sedan pull into Karen's driveway, its headlights sweeping across his yard before going dark. A figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to violence. Marcus had seen that walk before. 25 years in engineering had put him on construction sites with all kinds of people, including the kind who handled problems that couldn't be solved with permits and inspections. The man didn't knock. Karen's front door opened before he reached it, light spilling onto the porch for just a moment before both figures disappeared inside. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Whatever game Karen was playing, she wasn't playing it alone. His phone buzzed on the table. Text message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some things should stay buried. This is your only warning. Marcus stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of him wanted to respond with defiance, to let whoever was watching know that he wouldn't be intimidated. But the rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through decades of dangerous construction sites, recognized the situation for what it was. He was alone, in possession of evidence that could destroy multiple lives, facing people who had already killed once to protect their secret. He needed help. But who could he trust? The police were the obvious choice, but Marcus had read enough crime stories to know how those conversations went. You found what where? In your own backyard. And you didn't call us immediately because? They'd treat him like a suspect first, a witness second. And if Karen had connections in the local police, 15 years was a long time to build relationships. Marcus might find himself charged with obstruction or evidence tampering before anyone bothered to investigate the real crime. He needed someone outside the system, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Marcus scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. Jennifer Walsh, investigative reporter. He'd met Jenny 5 years ago when she'd done a series on construction safety violations in the county. She was young, aggressive, and completely unafraid of powerful people. More importantly, she owed him a favor after he'd provided inside information that had helped her expose a contractor who'd been using substandard materials in school buildings. It was nearly 3 a.m., but Marcus knew Jenny was a night owl. Her phone rang 3 times before she answered. "This better be good, Webb. I'm on deadline." "Jenny, I need your help. I've stumbled into something big." "How big?" Her voice sharpened with interest. "Murder. Cover-up. 15 years old and buried in my backyard." A pause. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." The line went dead. Marcus looked at the evidence spread across his table, then at Karen's house where the mysterious visitor's car still sat in the driveway. He had an hour to decide how much to tell Jenny, how much to risk, and whether he was ready to destroy the quiet life he'd built in Maple Ridge Estates. But first, he had something else to do. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and headed back outside. The top crackled as he pulled it aside, revealing the excavation that had started as a home improvement project and become a crime scene. If Karen thought she could manipulate him into uncovering Tommy's remains and then control the narrative, she was about to learn otherwise. Marcus knelt beside the hole and began carefully photographing everything: the position of the fabric, the way the concrete had been poured around the burial site, the deliberate nature of the concealment. As he worked, a theory began forming in his mind. Karen hadn't just known about Tommy's death, she'd been there when it happened. Maybe she'd even participated. But something had changed recently, something that made exposing the truth more valuable than hiding it. The insurance money. Marcus remembered the newspaper articles mentioning a life insurance policy on Tommy, a substantial payout that had been held up by the ongoing investigation. If Tommy's body was never found, the insurance company could delay payment indefinitely. But if his remains were discovered in circumstances that pointed away from the family, say, in another person's backyard, discovered during innocent renovations, the policy would pay out. And Karen, as Tommy's closest surviving relative, would inherit everything. She wasn't seeking justice for her nephew. She was cashing in on his murder. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made Marcus look up. Jenny's Honda Civic pulled into his driveway, followed immediately by the slam of a car door and the click of heels on pavement. "Christ, Webb, you look like hell," Jenny said as she approached. She was exactly as he remembered, 5'0" of concentrated energy, red hair pulled back in a messy bun, camera bag slung over her shoulder like a weapon. "Thanks for coming." "Don't thank me yet. Show me what you found." Marcus led her to the excavation, pulling back the top with the solemnity of a funeral director. Jenny's reaction was immediate and professional. She began photographing everything before he could even explain the context. "How long has this been here?" she asked, her camera clicking rapidly. 15 years, give or take. The remains belonged to Tommy Martinez, a local kid who disappeared in 2009. Jenny lowered her camera, her expression sharpening. "Martinez. I know that name. Missing person case, never solved. Family offered a big reward. 50,000. But here's the interesting part. The kid's aunt is my HOA president. She's the one who forced me to stop work on this pool, claiming property line violations. She wanted you to find the body." "That's my theory. Question is why now? What changed?" Jenny knelt beside the excavation, her journalist's instincts taking over. "Insurance money would be my guess. Most policies have a 7-year waiting period. For presumed death, but if there's an ongoing investigation, companies can delay indefinitely. Finding the body removes that obstacle. Even if it's found in suspicious circumstances. Especially then. Creates reasonable doubt about family involvement." Jenny stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Smart plan, actually. Use an innocent neighbor to uncover the evidence, then play the grieving relative seeking closure." A car door slammed in the distance. Both Marcus and Jenny turned toward the sound, seeing the black sedan backing out of Karen's driveway. The driver's window was down, and for just a moment, Marcus caught a glimpse of the man's face in the streetlight. He recognized him. "Son of a bitch," Marcus whispered. "What?" "The guy driving that car. His name is Danny Reeves. He worked construction for the original developer here. I remember him from the safety violation story you did. He was one of the contractors using substandard concrete." Jenny's eyes lit up with understanding. The same concrete that's in your pool deck. Has to be. Which means Danny knew about the body from the beginning. He poured the concrete around it. The implications crashed over Marcus like a wave. Danny Reeves hadn't just helped hide Tommy Martinez's murder, he'd literally cemented the cover-up. And now, 15 years later, he was back to help Karen collect the insurance money. We need to call the police, J.E. Karen Martinez arrived at Marcus's house at precisely 9 a.m., armed with a thermos of coffee and what appeared to be genuine concern. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, the picture of a caring neighbor checking on a friend's well-being. Marcus watched her approach through his kitchen window, noting the way she avoided looking directly at the covered excavation. Jenny crouched behind his couch, camera ready, having arrived before dawn to set up surveillance equipment. "Showtime," Marcus muttered, then opened the door before Karen could knock. "Marcus, honey, I hope you're not upset about yesterday." Karen's voice dripped with manufactured sympathy. "I know the survey results were shocking, but rules are rules. Actually, I wanted to thank you." Marcus stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "You probably saved me from making a huge mistake." Karen's carefully composed expression flickered with surprise. "Oh. I spent all night thinking about what you said. About digging too deep. And you were right, I found some things that were better left buried." The coffee thermos trembled slightly in Karen's hands. "What kind of things?" Marcus led her to the kitchen table where he'd arranged his laptop and several printed documents, real property records mixed with fabricated, geological surveys that Jenny had helped him create. "Soil contamination," Marcus said, watching Karen's face carefully. "The area where I was excavating shows signs of chemical contamination dating back to the original construction. If I'd kept digging, I could have exposed my family to toxic materials." Relief flooded Karen's features so obviously that Marcus almost pitied her. "Almost. That's terrible," she managed. "Do you know what kind of chemicals?" "The preliminary tests suggest industrial solvents, probably dumped during construction 15 years ago." Marcus pulled up a fake lab report on his laptop. "The testing company says it's consistent with materials used in concrete mixing during that period." Karen leaned forward, studying the screen with an intensity that betrayed her true interest. 15 years ago, that would be around the time this development was built. "Exactly. Which means the contamination probably extends beyond just my property." Marcus turned the laptop toward her. "Look at these soil samples. The highest concentrations are actually closer to the property line, right where you said the pool extends into HOA territory." "My God," Karen whispered, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, the woman looked genuinely shaken. "If there's contamination in the common area, the HOA could be liable for cleanup costs. We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more." Marcus let that sink in before delivering his next line. "Unless, of course, the contamination is contained to areas that aren't officially part of the HOA's responsibility." Karen's eyes snapped to his face. "What do you mean?" "Well, if my pool really does extend into HOA territory, then the association would be responsible for remediation. But if the property lines are actually where my original survey says they are," Marcus shrugged, "then it's my problem, not the community's." He could practically see the calculations running behind Karen's eyes. The insurance payout for Tommy's death would be substantial, but not enough to cover major environmental cleanup costs. If the HOA got hit with a contamination lawsuit, Karen's property values would plummet and her position as president would become a liability rather than an asset. "I think," Karen said slowly, "we should have your property resurveyed. By an independent company this time." "Really? But yesterday you seemed so certain about the boundary dispute." "Yesterday I was focused on protecting the community. Today I'm thinking about what's best for everyone involved." Karen pulled out her phone. "I know a surveyor who specializes in environmental issues. Very discreet, very thorough." Marcus pretended to consider this. "I suppose that makes sense. But what about the excavation? I've already broken up so much of the pool deck." "Leave it exactly as it is," Karen said quickly. "Don't touch anything until we get a proper survey done. And Marcus, this conversation should stay between us for now. No need to panic the neighbors until we know exactly what we are dealing with. Of course. I wouldn't want to cause unnecessary worry. Karen stood, her composure fully restored now that she thought she'd regained control of the situation. I'll make some calls this morning. We should be able to get someone out here by the end of the week. After she left, Jenny emerged from her hiding spot, grinning like a predator. Holy shit, that was beautiful, she said, checking her camera. Did you see her face when you mentioned the contamination? She went white as a sheet. She's terrified the HOA will get stuck with cleanup costs. But more than that, she needs to make sure any investigation focuses on the pool area, not the surrounding property. Because that's where Tommy's buried. Exactly. She can't risk having investigators dig up the whole yard. She needs them to find the body in a specific location under specific circumstances. Jenny was already uploading photos to her secure server. So what's her next move? She'll bring in her own surveyor, probably someone who's in on the conspiracy. They'll discover that my property lines are actually where I originally thought they were, which conveniently makes the contamination my responsibility instead of the HOA's. And then she'll suggest I hire a remediation company to clean up the contaminated soil. Want to guess who'll recommend the contractor? Danny Reeves. Bingo. And when Dana's crew starts digging up the contaminated soil, they'll miraculously discover Tommy Martinez's remains. Jenny whistled softly. Elegant. Karen gets her insurance money, the HOA avoids liability, and everyone assumes the contamination and the body are unrelated discoveries. There's just one problem with her plan, Marcus said, walking to the window. Across the street, he could see Karen pacing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear. She doesn't know we are recording everything. Speaking of which, I've got some news from my research last night. Jenny pulled out her own laptop, scrolling through documents. I did some digging into Danny Reeves's construction company. Guess what happened to it 6 months after Tommy Martinez disappeared? It went out of business. Worse, Danny filed for bankruptcy, but not before transferring most of his assets to a shell company owned by, wait for it, Karen Martinez. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. She bought his silence. More than that, she made him a partner. That shell company has been doing subcontract work for major developers throughout the county. Karen's been laundering Dana's reputation while he keeps his mouth shut about Tommy. But now she doesn't need his silence anymore. She needs his cooperation for one final job. Right. And when it's over, I'll bet Danny Reeves has an unfortunate accident. Dead men tell no tales, and Karen gets to keep all the insurance money. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text message from Karen. Surveyor will be here Friday at 10 a.m. Please make sure the excavation area is accessible. Thanks for being so understanding about this situation. Friday, Marcus told Jenny. That gives us 3 days to prepare. Prepare? For what? To give Karen Martinez exactly what she wants, while making sure she gets exactly what she deserves. Jenny closed her laptop, her expression turning serious. Marcus, you realize what we are really doing here, right? We are not just exposing a murder. We are putting ourselves in the crosshairs of people who have killed before and won't hesitate to kill again. I know. Marcus looked at the covered excavation, thinking about the 17-year-old boy whose life had been cut short and buried under concrete. But Tommy Martinez deserves justice. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let his killer profit from his death. Then we better make sure we are smarter than they are. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number, but he recognized the voice immediately. Danny Reeves, his words slurred with alcohol and desperation. Listen to me, you son of a bitch. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. Walk away from this, or I'll bury you right next to the kid. The line went dead. Marcus and Jenny stared at each other across the sudden silence. Well, Jenny said finally, I guess we know how Danny feels about our investigation. He's scared. Karen probably told him about the contamination story, and is worried we are getting too close to the truth. Or maybe Karen told him to make that call. Test our reaction, see if we are really as clueless as we are pretending to be. Marcus considered this. If Karen suspected they were running a con, she might be running a countercon of her own. The surveyor appointment could be a trap. designed to draw them into the open where Danny could silence them permanently. "We need backup," he said finally. "Someone who knows where we are and what we are doing." "Already handled. My editor has copies of everything, and I've got a friend in the state police who owes me a favor. If something happens to us, the investigation goes public within hours." "Good, because I have a feeling Friday is going to be very interesting." As if summoned by his words, a black pickup truck cruised slowly past Marcus's house. Danny Reeves sat behind the wheel, his face visible for just a moment as he turned to stare at the excavation site. The truck continued down the street, but the message was clear. They were being watched. "Jenny," Marcus said quietly, "how do you feel about spending the next few days somewhere else? Maybe a hotel." "Not a chance. I'm not missing this story." "Then we better make sure we." Friday morning arrived grey and cold, with a kind of persistent drizzle that made everything look like a crime scene waiting to happen. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching Karen's house through the rain-streaked glass. She'd been moving around since dawn, lights flickering on and off, shadows passing behind curtains, the unmistakable energy of someone preparing for battle. Jenny crouched beside the refrigerator, adjusting the tiny cameras they'd installed throughout the house. "Audio check," she whispered into her headset. "Command, this is Observer 1. Do you copy?" The response crackled through their earpieces. Detective Sarah Chen from the state police, Jenny's contact who'd agreed to monitor the situation from a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. "Copy, Observer 1. We have eyes on the street." Black pickup truck just turned onto Maple Ridge Drive. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Danny Reeves was early, which meant they were eager to get this over with. Too eager, maybe. "Remember the plan," Jenny murmured. "Let them think they're in control until we have everything on record." At exactly 10 a.m., a white van with precision land surveys painted on the side pulled into Marcus's driveway. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same company name that had done his original, supposedly unreliable survey 15 years ago. Either Karen had a sense of humor, or she was sending a message. The surveyor who emerged was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 35, with a kind of nervous energy that suggested this wasn't a routine job. He introduced himself as Mike Sullivan and immediately began unloading equipment with the efficiency of someone who wanted to finish quickly. Karen arrived 10 minutes later, wearing rain boots and a concerned expression. "Marcus, I hope this won't be too disruptive. Mike says he should be able to complete the property assessment in a few hours." "No problem at all," Marcus replied, playing his role. "I just want to know what we are dealing with." Mike Sullivan was already setting up his surveying equipment, but Marcus noticed something odd. The man kept glancing toward the street, as if waiting for a signal. When the black pickup truck appeared around the corner, Mike's movements became more deliberate. Danny Reeves climbed out of the truck slowly, scanning the neighborhood before approaching the group. He looked older than Marcus remembered, worn down by 15 years of carrying secrets. But his eyes were alert, dangerous. "Morning, folks," Danny said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Martinez asked me to stop by, given the environmental concerns." "Danner's got experience with contaminated soil," Karen explained. "If we need remediation, he can handle it discreetly." "Discreetly?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why would we need discretion?" "Property values," Karen said quickly. "No point in panicking the neighbors until we know what we are dealing with." Mike Sullivan had finished setting up his equipment and was now approaching the covered excavation. "Mr. Webb, I'll need to examine the area where you were digging. Can you remove the top?" Marcus pulled back the cover, revealing the broken concrete and disturbed earth. He watched Mike's face carefully, looking for any sign that the man knew what lay beneath the surface. "Interesting," Mike said, kneeling beside the hole. "The concrete work here is unusual." "Unusual how?" Danner's voice was sharp, too sharp. "Well, typically when you pour a pool deck, you use a consistent aggregate mixture. But this looks like 2 different pours. See how the concrete composition changes right about here." Mike pointed to the exact spot where Marcus had found Tommy's clothing. Karen and Danny exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to their script. Could that affect the contamination assessment? Marcus asked innocently. "Possibly. If different contractors used different materials, or if there was a gap between pours." Mike trailed off, studying his instruments. Actually, I'm getting some unusual readings here. Mr. Webb, have you considered having this area examined by an archaeologist? The word hit the group like a physical blow. Karen went pale, Dana's hands clenched into fists, and Marcus felt a surge of vindication. Mike Sullivan wasn't part of the conspiracy. He was a legitimate surveyor doing legitimate work. An archaeologist. Karen's voice climbed an octave. Why would we need an archaeologist? Ground-penetrating radar is showing some anomalies consistent with deliberate burial. Could be artifacts, could be construction debris, but the pattern suggests something was intentionally placed here. Danny stepped forward, his pretense of calm evaporating. That's ridiculous. This is a residential development, not some ancient burial ground. I'm not talking about ancient burials, Mike said, still focused on his equipment. These readings suggest something much more recent. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Marcus could see the calculation in Karen's eyes. How much exposure could she risk? How far could she let this investigation go before it spiraled beyond her control? Then Danny made the decision for her. Everybody step back, he said, pulling a gun from beneath his jacket. This conversation is over. The weapon changed everything. Mike Sullivan scrambled backward, his surveying equipment forgotten. Karen's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold intelligence beneath her suburban facade. Danny, put that away, she hissed. This isn't how we planned. Plans change, Danny snarled. This bastard knows exactly what's down there, and so do you. The only question is how many people we have to bury to keep it quiet. Marcus raised his hands slowly, playing for time. Through his earpiece, he could hear Detective Chen coordinating with backup units. But they were still minutes away, and Danny looked desperate enough to start shooting. You're right, Marcus said. I know exactly what's buried here. Tommy Martinez has been under my pool deck for 15 years. Karen's composure cracked completely. How did you? When did you? The first day I started excavating. You orchestrated this whole thing to get the body discovered, but you wanted it to look accidental. Insurance fraud, right? Collect on Tommy's policy now that his remains have been found under mysterious circumstances. You have no proof, Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, we have everything. Marcus smiled grimly. Every conversation, every phone call, every meeting you've had since this started. Did you really think I was stupid enough to take on the HOA president without backup? Dana's grip on the gun tightened. Where are the recordings? Somewhere you'll never find them. And if anything happens to me, they go public within the hour. He's bluffing, Karen said, but she didn't sound certain. Mike Sullivan, meanwhile, had been quietly backing toward his van. Marcus hoped the surveyor would have the sense to drive away and call for help, but instead the man pulled out his cell phone and started recording. Mr. Sullivan, Danny said, turning the gun toward the surveyor, I strongly suggest you delete that video and forget you were ever here. I don't think so, Mike replied, his voice steadier than Marcus would have expected. I'm a licensed surveyor, which means I'm a mandated reporter. If there are human remains on this property, I'm legally required to notify the authorities. There won't be any remains to report if I bury you with them. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could feel the situation spiraling toward violence, and he knew they were running out of time. Danny was past the point of rational calculation. He was operating on pure desperation now. But Karen Martinez was still thinking. Danny, she said quietly, look around. Do you see any news vans? Any police cars? If Marcus really had evidence, where's his backup? It was a good question, and Marcus saw doubt flicker across Dana's face. The rain had picked up, reducing visibility and muffling sound. From Dana's perspective, they were alone and vulnerable. You want to know where my backup is? Marcus said, making a calculated gamble. Jenny, come on out. Jenny Walsh emerged from behind the house, camera in hand, having documented everything. From multiple angles. But she wasn't alone. Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers flank her, weapons drawn. Police. Drop your weapon. Danny spun toward the new threat, his gun wavering between targets. For a moment that felt like hours, the standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Then Karen Martinez made her final play. It was all Dana's idea, she said, stepping away from him. He killed Tommy during a robbery, buried him here, and has been blackmailing me ever since. I only went along with the excavation plan because he threatened my family. The betrayal hit Danny like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage as he turned the gun toward Karen. You lying bitch. You're the one who, the first police. Shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second dropped him to the ground, his weapon skittering across the wet pavement. As the officers moved in to secure the scene, Marcus found himself staring at Karen Martinez. Even with her co-conspirator bleeding on his driveway, even with 15 years of lies unraveling around her, she maintained her composure. This proves nothing, she said to him quietly, while the police shouted orders and Jenny documented everything. Danny was unstable, desperate. His word against mine won't hold up in court. Marcus smiled. You're right. His word alone wouldn't be enough. Then you have nothing. I have Tommy. For the first time since he'd known her, Karen Martinez looked genuinely confused. I don't understand. You spent 15 years assuming Tommy Martinez was dead, Marcus explained as the paramedics worked on Danny. The man who walked through the rain toward Karen Martinez bore little resemblance to the 17-year-old quarterback whose disappearance had haunted Maple Ridge for 15 years. Tommy Martinez moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned that survival required constant vigilance. Scars traced pale lines across his left temple where Dana's shovel had connected, and his left hand hung slightly crooked, a permanent reminder of clawing his way out of a concrete grave. But his eyes were the same. Dark, intelligent, and now burning with a fury that 15 years had only refined into something surgical. Karen stared at him as if he were a ghost made flesh. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the carefully constructed lies of a decade and a half crumbling in the face of impossible truth. Hello, Aunt Karen, Tommy said, his voice carrying the weight of buried years. Miss me? You're dead, she whispered. Danny said you were dead. Tommy glanced at Danny Reeves, who lay handcuffed and bleeding on Marcus's driveway while paramedics worked on his shoulder. Danny says a lot of things. Most of them are lies. Detective Chen stepped forward, her weapon still drawn but lowered. Mr. Martinez, I need you to stay back while we process the scene. Of course, Detective. I've waited 15 years for this moment. I can wait a few more minutes. Tommy's smile was arctic. Besides, I want to make sure Karen hears the whole story. She's earned that much. Marcus found himself caught between fascination and horror as the pieces finally clicked into place. You've been planning this all along. The property dispute, the excavation, even my involvement. You orchestrated everything. Not everything, Tommy corrected. Karen gave me the idea when she moved back to Maple Ridge 5 years ago. She thought she was keeping an eye on the burial site, making sure no one would ever dig too deep. But she was actually showing me exactly how to trap her. Jenny Walsh continued filming, her journalistic instincts overriding the surreal nature of the situation. How did you survive? How is any of this possible? Tommy's expression darkened. October 15, 2009. I was walking home from Sarah Chen's house, different Sarah Chen than the detective here. Karen had called, said my parents wanted to see me urgently. Family emergency. Tommy, don't, Karen started, but he cut her off with a look that could have melted steel. When I got here, Danny was waiting in the backyard with a shovel. Karen was there too, counting out cash like she was paying for groceries. Turns out my life insurance policy was worth more to her than my actual life. Detective Chen was taking notes, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture. This was beyond anything she'd prepared for. They didn't just try to kill me for money, Tommy continued, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. Karen had been stealing from my trust fund for years. My parents' death settlement, college money, everything. When I turned 18, I would have gained access to the accounts. She needed me gone before I could discover the theft. So they tried to beat you to death with a shovel, Marcus said, the brutality of it hitting him like a physical blow. Danny did the beating. Karen did the thinking. Tommy's scarred hand clenched into a fist. When they thought I was dead, they dumped me in the hole where your pool deck stands now. But they were in a hurry. Construction crews were coming back the next morning to pour concrete. They didn't check for a pulse. Karen had gone completely white, her composure finally shattered beyond repair. You were dead. No heartbeat, no breathing, unconscious. Severe concussion, broken ribs, internal bleeding. But teenage bodies are remarkably resilient. Tommy's smile held no warmth. I woke up buried under 2 feet of concrete, in a space barely large enough to breathe. Do you know what that's like, Karen? Do you know what it's like to claw your way through concrete with broken fingers? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain and Dana's labored breathing. Even the police officers had stopped moving, transfixed by the horror of Tommy's story. I had maybe 6 hours of air, Tommy continued. The concrete hadn't fully cured, so I could break through it, but every breath used up precious oxygen. I had to choose, die slowly from suffocation, or risk everything on digging my way out. But the concrete, Marcus said. It would have been tons of weight. They'd only poured the top layer. The foundation was already set, so they just needed to finish the surface. I wasn't buried under the whole deck, just trapped in a pocket near the edge. Tommy touched the scars on his temple. Still took me 8 hours to break through. 8 hours of digging with my bare hands, breathing my own carbon dioxide, not knowing if I was digging up or down. Jenny lowered her camera, the full scope of the nightmare finally hitting her. How did you survive afterward? Where have you been all these years? Foster care, initially. I was found by a homeless man near the river, barely alive, no memory of who I was or what had happened. Took months to recover physically, years to remember everything. Tommy looked directly at Karen. But I remembered eventually. Every detail. Every word you said while you were counting that money. Karen was trembling now, her facade completely gone. If you were alive, why didn't you come forward? Why wait 15 years? Because I was 17 years old with no family, no money, and no proof. Your word against mine, and you were a respected member of the community. Plus, I had a bigger problem. What problem? Tommy's expression hardened. You'd already collected on my life insurance. $50,000, paid out. After I was declared legally dead. If I came forward immediately, you'd just return the money and claim it was all a misunderstanding. Danny would disappear, you'd move away, and I'd never get real justice. The calculation behind it was breathtaking. Marcus realized that Tommy hadn't just survived attempted murder, he'd spent 15 years becoming someone capable of destroying his would-be killers completely. So you waited, Detective Chen said, beginning to understand. You let them think they'd gotten away with it. I built a case, Tommy corrected. I became someone who could take them down properly. Law degree, investigator's license, connections in law enforcement. I've been documenting Karen's financial crimes for 5 years, tracking every dollar she stole from my trust fund, every fraudulent claim she's made. He pulled a thick folder from his jacket, handing it to Detective Chen. Bank records, insurance, documents, recorded conversations, everything you need to put her away for life. The attempted murder is just the cherry on top. Karen made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. You manipulated Marcus into finding your own grave. I gave him the opportunity to be a hero, Tommy replied. The choice was always his. Marcus felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. The property dispute was fake. The survey was real, the boundary issue was real. But I made sure Karen would use it to force you to stop digging, right up until she realized she could use your excavation to discover my body and claim the insurance money. Tommy's smile was genuinely warm for the first time. You played your part perfectly, Mr. Webb. Without you, I never could have gotten them to confess on camera. Danny Reeves had been listening to everything, his face grey with pain and defeat. You bastard, he wheezed. You let me think I'd killed a kid. 15 years of nightmares, 15 years of looking over my shoulder. Good, Tommy said simply. You deserved every sleepless night. Detective Chen was coordinating with additional units, the scene transforming into a full crime scene. Investigation. But Marcus found himself focused on Karen Martinez, who sat on his front steps looking like she'd aged a decade in the past hour. The question now, Tommy said, approaching his aunt with predatory calm, is what happens next. You stole my inheritance, tried to have me murdered, collected insurance money on my supposed death, and spent 15 years living off the proceeds. The legal penalties alone will put you away for decades. But Karen looked up at him with desperate hope. But I'm not interested in legal penalties, Tommy continued. I want everything back. Every dollar you stole, every cent of interest, every asset you've purchased with my money. I want your house, your savings, your retirement accounts, everything. That would leave me with nothing. It would leave you with your life, Tommy. Corrected. Which is more than you intended to leave me with. As the police led Karen away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at Tommy one last time. I raised you after your parents died. I loved you like my own son. Tommy's expression didn't change. No, Karen. You loved my inheritance. You just got confused about which one was which. The ambulance pulled away with Danny Reeves, followed by the police cars with Karen Martinez. As the circus of emergency vehicles departed, Marcus found himself alone in his driveway with Tommy Martinez and Jenny Walsh. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Tommy looked at the excavation site where he'd spent the worst hours of his life. Now I figure out who I really am. I've spent 15 years being driven by revenge. It's going to take some adjustment to live without it. What about the house? Marcus gestured toward his property. This is still technically a crime scene. The house is yours, Mr. Webb. Clear title, no disputes. The only thing buried here now is the past. Tommy pulled out his car keys, though you might want to consider a different pool contractor. As Tommy drove away, Jenny finally stopped filming. That's the most incredible,